everyone, welcome back to my channel for a brand new mystery with Mollie. If you are new around here, if you've never seen my face on your screen before, then hi, my name is Mollie and I post true crime videos like this every single week. So if you think that that is something that you might want to stick around for, then please do subscribe and don't forget to switch on the little notification bell so that YouTube will let you know whenever I post a new video. This week we're going to be talking about a solved case from Pennsylvania when a young Girl Scout just mysteriously vanished while she was walking home from a Halloween party one night in the fall of 1992. The police, her family, and the local community immediately sprung into action to try and find her, desperately hoping to bring her home alive. But tragically, that wouldn't happen when just days later, her body was found. She'd been the victim of the most horrific homicide. Despite obtaining a DNA profile of the perpetrator, years and years would pass by with the case remaining unsolved, and unfortunately it went cold. That was until more than a decade after the crime, when a fresh look into the investigation into the old case files revealed to new detectives that the person, or people even, responsible for this sickening crime had been effectively right in front of the authorities this entire time. It was simply a huge error on the police's part, which meant that they were able to fly under the radar and get away with this crime for more than 10 years. A crime that would actually see Halloween and trick-or-treating banned in the town where this case occurred, as it was considered to be too dangerous to allow children to walk the streets with a killer lurking in the shadows. Join me as we delve into the tragic and chilling case of Shauna Howe. But quickly before we get into the case, I would like to say a big thank you to Sunshine Island for very kindly sponsoring this section of the video. Sunshine Island is a super fun and cozy farming and tycoon adventure mobile game where you get to manage and design 3 islands, each with a completely different and unique look. From tropical farms to bustling harbours, in Sunshine Island you'll take care of animals, work on production chains, harvest exotic crops, trade with neighbours, and you can even team up with friends in global guild events. But being able to customise my island has 100% been the best part for me. I love being able to decorate how I want and move things around. It's just been so fun to literally transform my little village into this thriving paradise island. And I also love tending to the animals and making sure that they are well fed and have everything they need. Playing Sunshine Island has just been the perfect way for me to chill out and relax. I like to play whilst I'm just watching TV in the evenings during my downtime. And what's great about Sunshine Island is that there are always new things happening. They host limited time events and seasonal events where you can earn rewards. Like right now, for example, they have a Halloween themed in-game event which is packed full of seasonal content. And from the 20th of October until the 3rd of November, they are running a pumpkin hunt, which I'm so excited to take part in. There will be pumpkins hidden all over your 3 islands, and each pumpkin that you find will help you to hit a new milestone and unlock unique rewards. So now is definitely the perfect time to get involved and download the game. You can download and play Sunshine Island for free by clicking the link in the description box or by scanning the QR code that is on the screen right now. Sunshine Island is available on both iOS and Android devices, and if you download the game via my link and use my exclusive voucher in the settings menu, then you will be able to claim 250 gems and 100,000 coins. Yes, 100,000 coins to give you a real good head start. You're welcome. Thank you so much once again to Sunshine Island for sponsoring this video and supporting the channel. Thank you as always to all of you guys watching for always showing your support to the sponsors that we work with on this channel. And now let's just get into the case. But just before we continue, please listen carefully to the following. This video contains heavy themes such as sexual assault against minors. Viewer discretion is advised. So for this week's case, we are going back nearly 33 years ago now to October of 1992 in Oil City, which is obviously a city located in Venango County in the state of Pennsylvania in the US. And this is Shauna Howe. She was an 11-year-old girl who in 1992 was living in Oil City with her family. Shauna Melinda Howe was born on the 11th of July 1981. Her mother was named Lucy, and I couldn't actually find the name of her father anywhere online. family. Her parents had separated when Shauna was young, but she still maintained a close relationship with her father. He was still very much in the picture. Shauna was, I believe, one of 4 children. I think she had 2 sisters and 1 brother, and by all accounts they had a normal, happy childhood in Oil City. Shauna was described as being just a very cute, friendly and outgoing young girl. She was bright and bubbly, she had a lot of friends, she enjoyed school, she was in the 5th grade at school, and she was also a part of the local Girl Scouts, which she absolutely loved. She loved being a part of the Girl Scouts and doing all of the Girl Scouts activities. And actually taking part in a Girl Scouts activity, or event I should say, was exactly what 11-year-old Shauna Howe had been doing on the day that this case occurred. The date was the 27th of October 1992. It was a Tuesday, and a day that began like any other for Shauna. It was a school day, so Shauna woke up that morning, got ready, headed off to school, and then when she returned home from school, she immediately started getting ready for a Girl Scouts event that was taking place that evening. Obviously, it was the 27th of October, just a couple of days away from Halloween, which was another thing that Shauna loved. She loved Halloween. Her mother Lucy said that she really enjoyed planning her Halloween outfit every year and getting dressed up, ready to go trick-or-treating. And that Tuesday night, the Girl Scouts group had planned to dress up and go to one of the local nursing homes in Oil City to basically entertain the elderly residents. Apparently, Shauna's Girl Scout group would often go to the nursing home, as each member had been essentially assigned a grandparent there that they could chat to and spend time with and just make the residents feel a little less lonely, I guess, which is really sweet. But anyway, once Shauna returned home from school, she started getting ready for the Girl Scouts. She had decided that she was going to dress up as a gymnast that Halloween. So she was wearing this striped turquoisey coloured leotard bodysuit thing. She was also wearing some shorts and some tights, and then she excitedly showed her mum Lucy her outfit. And then at around 4:30 p.m. she said goodbye to her mum Lucy and her stepfather John, gave them a hug, and then she left the house. And of course they expected to just see Shauna later that night when she returned from the Girl Scouts. They were none the wiser that in fact that would be the last time they would ever see their 11-year-old daughter alive again. After leaving the house, Shauna walked a short distance to her friend's house. This friend was also a Girl Scout, and then the girls got a lift together to the nursing home. They were at the nursing home for a while. By all accounts, Shauna had a really fun time. The event was a success. Sources state that after the event, the Girl Scouts then had a little Halloween party in the nearby church, and then when that ended, sometime between 7:30 to 8 p.m, Shauna began the journey back to her address, only she never made it there. For some reason, at some point along her route, she seemed to just disappear. She never returned home. Around an hour later, at approximately 8:30, 8:45-ish, Shauna's mother Lucy received a call while she was at work. She worked at this local pizza parlour and she had a shift that evening, and during her shift she was contacted by her partner, Shauna's stepfather John. He was concerned as Shauna hadn't returned home from the Girl Scouts yet, and he knew that she should have been back by now. And so of course naturally Lucy also started to worry. She couldn't understand why Shauna wasn't back. And then it hit her. Usually Shauna would catch a ride home from the Girl Scouts with one of her friends and fellow Girl Scout Jennifer. Jennifer's parents would always drop Shauna back, but then Lucy suddenly remembered that Jennifer and her family weren't actually in town that night. They'd gone on a big family holiday to Florida, and Lucy had just completely forgot. It completely escaped her mind. So Shauna wouldn't have been getting a lift back with them, and so likely would have started just walking home on her own from the Girl Scouts. And I mean, it wasn't a very long walk at all, don't get me wrong, but you know, it was around 8 p.m. when she left the Halloween party. It was October, so it would have been dark outside, and so of course her mother Lucy was immediately panicked. She left work and went straight back home, and the family started just calling everyone that they could think of. Shauna's father, her friends, asking if she was with any of them. She wasn't. They also contacted the local hospitals thinking that that perhaps Shauna had been involved in some kind of accident, maybe a car accident or something. But again, they had no luck. No hospital had any record of her being brought in. They went out looking along the streets for Shauna, shouting her name, but there was nothing, no sign of her anywhere. And so now, extremely panicked, Lucy picked up the phone again, but this time to call the police and report her 11-year-old daughter as missing. Police officers were dispatched to the family home to take a statement from Shauna's family, and it wasn't long at all before there seemed to be a possible development in the case, the kind of development that no one wanted to hear. Whilst the officers were at the home, they started getting information on their police radio that a man, a member of the public, had very recently reported to the authorities that he believed he had just witnessed an abduction. The abduction of a young girl. It was reported by a man named Dan Payden, and he informed the police that at around 8 p.m. that same evening, the evening of the 27th of October, he had been just walking down West 1st Street and Reed Street in Oil City, which was only about 2 blocks away from Shauna's home, when he saw a young girl also walking down the street in the direction opposite him. She was walking on the other side of the road. He said that this girl was wearing a turquoisey leotard / bodysuit with shorts and ties, and what she was wearing actually stood out to him because he remembered thinking that it was quite a cold night to wear that kind of outfit. But of course it was a Halloween outfit. This was Shauna. This was her gymnast outfit that she had put together for her Girl Scouts event and party that evening. This was Shauna walking back home after the party ended. But as we know, she never made it there, and Dan Payden knew why. As he continued walking, Dan also spotted a man, this tall, white, thin man who was wearing a baseball cap and glasses, and he was walking in the direction towards Shauna. Of course, Dan didn't really think anything of this at the time, so he kind of looked away for a moment or two, but then all of a sudden he heard the sound of a scream, a girl screaming. He looked over to where the scream had come from, and whilst he didn't see anyone, he did see a small red sedan car immediately speeding away, and the young girl was gone. And he immediately thought, oh my god, that girl that I just saw, the girl in the bodysuit and shorts, has just been kidnapped off of the street. That's what the scream must have been. And so he rushed to a phone and he called 911. So practically right from the off, police knew what they were dealing with here. They knew that Shauna Howe had been abducted. She'd been kidnapped, again, just 2 blocks away from her home, and so time was of the essence, as police are fully aware that the longer a child is missing for, the less and less likely it is that they are found alive. So officers were immediately drafted in to begin searches for Shauna that same night. They were searching along the streets, stopping cars, going door to door. Meanwhile, Shauna's mother Lucy was instructed to stay home, stay by the phone, just in case either Shauna rang or her kidnapper rang asking for ransom. Maybe that's why she'd been kidnapped. The perpetrator wanted ransom money. Family members and friends soon joined the search, as well as just other local people. Members of the community volunteered to help look for Shauna, but tragically they had no luck. They searched all through the night, but there was absolutely no sign of Shauna anywhere. The following day, the search continued, and missing posters with Shauna's face on were created and distributed around the area. Even more local people started joining the search. Everyone just wanted to help as much as they could. As you can imagine, a lot of these volunteers were parents themselves, and they couldn't even begin to comprehend what Shauna's parents were going through. The torment and fear of not knowing where their child was and if she was okay. So the community really did come together here. They just wanted to help and support the family. The media quickly started reporting on the case. They were trying to spread the word as much as possible, spread awareness. It really was all hands on deck to find Shauna Howe and bring her home. But even on the second day, there was nothing. No trace of her. Still no idea where Shauna was or who had taken her. It wouldn't be until the 3rd day of searching, well, 2 days after Shauna was last seen, on the 29th of October, when news did emerge in the case. News that something had been been found. It wasn't Shauna, but it was an item of her clothing. That day, a local man was walking through this remote area in Rockland in Oil City, which was known as Coulter's Hole. It was like this abandoned railroad site. And as he was walking through the area, he spotted on the ground in a bush what looked like a young girl's turquoise bodysuit. Now, this man had obviously seen on the news that a young girl, Shauna Howe, was missing. He knew the description of the clothing that she was wearing, and so thinking that this bodysuit may have been Shauna's, he immediately contacted the police. And sure enough, it was. The bodysuit was shown to Shauna's mother, Lucy, and she confirmed that it belonged to her daughter. That was a part of her gymnast costume that she had put together and had been wearing on the night that she vanished. And obviously the fact that it had been found just discarded in this abandoned remote area was very concerning. The fact that Shauna had clearly been stripped of her clothing, I think it just made everyone panic even more that Shauna may have been sexually assaulted by whoever had abducted her. And this theory was tragically confirmed when the bodysuit was sent to the forensics lab for further testing. Scientists were able to detect semen on it. There were semen stains on this bodysuit, and further tests on these stains allowed scientists to develop a DNA profile. They had the DNA of whoever had deposited this semen, whoever had assaulted Shauna. So given the fact that Shauna's bodysuit had been found in this area, police began a big thorough search of Coulter's Hole and the area surrounding it that same day to see if they could find anything else, any other evidence relating to Shauna. However, they didn't, and later that day the search of Coulter's Hole came to an end. Police packed up and they left. So you can imagine the detective shock when just the day following this, the 30th of October 1992, they received the heartbreaking news that a body had been found in that same exact area. The body was found by another local man who had actually seen on the news that police had been searching Coulter's Hole the previous day after finding Shauna's bodysuit. And so on the 30th, he decided to head to Coulter's Hole himself to see if he could find anything that might help with the investigation. He had no idea that he would in fact be the one to find Shauna dead. This man was walking across the abandoned railroad trestle bridge when he happened to glance over the bridge to the creek below, and that was when he spotted her. He spotted 11-year-old Shauna Howe lying dead on the ground in this creek. Finally, after 3 painful days of searching, she had been found. But of course, the news that she'd been found dead was something that no one wanted to hear, that everyone was praying would not become a reality. Shauna's 2 uncles, Keith and Claire, would be the ones to positively identify that the body in the creek was their niece, and I can't even begin to comprehend how traumatic that must have been for them. Not just the fact that they had to identify her, but also the fact that they then had to be the ones to inform their sister, Shauna's mother, Lucy, who was still just waiting by the phone at home, hoping to hear from Shauna or whoever had taken her. She was now informed that her daughter was never coming back, that her worst nightmare had come true. Shauna had been murdered. Shauna's shoes were also found on top of the bridge on the railroad tracks. There was also a candy wrapper nearby. And none of this, by the way, the shoes, the candy wrapper, or Shauna's body were there the day before when the bodysuit was found. Shauna's body was found in a location that was only about 200 yards away from where the bodysuit was. And as we discussed, the authorities conducted a thorough search of Coulter's Hole the previous day, and she wasn't there. And it wasn't like she'd been hidden or anything. There'd been no attempt to hide her body with like bushes and tree branches and undergrowth. She was just there out in the open. So she must have only been brought to this location the previous night. After the search party had left Coulter's Hole, the killer brought her back to the place where they ditched the bodysuit and they dumped Shauna here too. I mean, it almost seemed like this was the killer taunting the police, because it had been all over the news that they had been searching Coulter's Hole. So it was like he was playing a game with them by one day dumping the bodysuit there and then the next Shauna's actual body. Shauna's body was very, very battered and bruised. She had a lot of injuries, but police couldn't tell from just looking at her body exactly how she had been killed. The truth surrounding her horrific death would not come to light until her autopsy was performed. The medical examiner concluded that Shauna's cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head and chest, and they determined that she'd sustained these injuries as a result of literally being thrown off of the railroad bridge that she was found underneath of. Shauna was still alive when she was taken to Coulter's Hole the previous evening. She'd obviously been kept alive and held captive somewhere for about 2 days before her killer brought her to this remote area in the middle of the night and just chucked her off of the bridge. Sources state that she'd suffered a broken arm, fractured ribs, and a dislocated shoulder as a result of the fall. And the fall itself was about a 33 feet drop. And what just makes this even more heartbreaking and disturbing is that the medical examiner also believed that Shauna most likely didn't die instantly from the impact of the fall, that she was probably still alive, clinging onto life for somewhere between 5 and 10 minutes after the drop. I mean, it's incomprehensible to imagine the pain and agony and fear that she must have been in for those 5 to 10 minutes before she finally passed away. It was also confirmed during her autopsy that Shauna had in fact been raped by her killer. Semen was found on her body, and when tested, this semen matched the semen stains that had been found on her bodysuit. Apparently, a single hair believed to have come from the perpetrator was also found either on her body or on her clothing. And something else that the medical examiner made note of was the fact that Shauna seemed to have these scuff type injuries on her knees, which looked to have maybe come from a carpet, like it was carpet burn or something. Naturally, news of Shauna's murder, news that her body had been found, spread like wildfire across the city, leaving everyone in a state of utter disbelief and shock. Because to be honest, crimes like this just didn't really happen here. Oil City was previously thought to be a very safe place in Pennsylvania. Parents didn't really have an issue with their kids walking the streets on their own, but I mean, now everything had changed. The whole community were terrified, so terrified in fact that Halloween was essentially cancelled in Oil City. Obviously, the 31st of October was just the day after Shauna's body was found, and parents were just too scared to let their children go out trick-or-treating, and so it was just banned, and it remained that way for years after Shauna's murder. It scared people that much that they stopped their kids trick-or-treating in Oil City. So now the case had turned from being a missing persons investigation, a kidnapping, to a murder inquiry. And given the fact that a child had been killed, the FBI were quickly called in to assist with the case, and the hunt for suspects began. Now, as we know, the police had the killer's DNA profile, so one of the very first things that they set out to do was compare this profile to samples taken from the men in Shauna's life. Her father, her stepfather John, her uncles, they even took a sample from Shauna's brother. However, none of them matched, so the police were able to rule the family out as having anything to do with this crime. They also looked closely at Shauna's peers, her friends' parents, just anyone that had had any kind of interaction with her, just in case the person responsible was known to Shauna Shauna. They also DNA tested the man who found Shauna's body and the man that witnessed her abduction, Dan Payden, but again, neither of them matched. And so the police began really kind of focusing on Dan Payden's statement. Obviously, he was the only witness to Shauna's kidnapping. And just to recount, he told the police that as Shauna was walking down the street, he also saw a tall, thin white man wearing a baseball cap and glasses walking close by to her. And then after hearing Shauna scream, he saw that red car speeding away, and then the man and Shauna were suddenly gone. So it seemed extremely likely that this man was Shauna's abductor. But who was he? Well, it wasn't long before the police had an idea of who he might have been. They appealed to the public about the sighting of this tall, thin man, and a tip came in reporting that a man named Aldred or Ted Walker fit this description. Ted Walker was a local man. He was, I believe, around his early 30s at this point in 1992. He worked in a pizza shop in Oil City, and to be honest, everyone that knew him just thought of him as being this really creepy guy, because he always seemed to show a strange interest in the local kids. Whenever young kids would go into the pizza place where he worked, he would always try to talk to them for ages, and he was just overly friendly with them all the time, particularly with the young girls. Young girls felt really uncomfortable around Walker, in all honesty, because he would always try to hug them and touch them, to the point where girls would literally run away from him when they saw him because they were scared that he would try to touch them. And he did know Shauna. He had met Shauna in the pizza shop before, I believe, so he knew the victim. He seemed to have a creepy interest in young girls. He matched the description of the tall, thin man that Dan Payden saw. And guess what else police learned about Ted Walker? He also owned a small red car, just like the one that had been seen at the site of Shauna's abduction. Or at least he used to own a small red car. Coincidentally, Ted's car was actually found on fire not long after Shauna was killed, which, as you can imagine, just heightened suspicions of him. Had Ted set his own car on fire to destroy evidence relating to Shauna's murder, perhaps? So because of all of this, Ted Walker really did become a very viable suspect in the case. Police really believed that he may have been responsible for this horrific crime. That was until they took a DNA sample from him and realised that it didn't match. Ted Walker was not a match to the semen that was recovered from Shauna's body. So that was him effectively ruled out. What was thought to be a very promising lead in the case, a very promising suspect, was ruled out. This seemed to be a dead end. The search for suspects continued. Police carried on taking DNA samples from several different men. Apparently they took DNA samples from more than 100 men in total, but not a single one matched. Not one. And police were really starting to struggle. They seemed to hit a wall in the case because, again, they just couldn't find that match. Every single individual that they thought could have been the perpetrator, they'd been able to eliminate via DNA. And eventually, days without an arrest turned into weeks, weeks turned into months, and months turned into years. Years started to pass with little to no movement in the Shauna Howe case, meaning that the community in Oil City continued to just live in that fear that there may have been a child killer living amongst them. A couple of years after Shauna was killed, in 1995, a cold case team began a kind of fresh look into the investigation because by this point it had kind of gone cold. They started poring over Shauna's old case files, going over everything again, all of the evidence, all of the statements taken, everything. And it was when they came across Dan Payden's statement that they suddenly developed a new theory in the case, something that hadn't really been considered by the original detectives. They really started thinking about how quickly Dan described everything happening that night. One minute he saw Shauna walking down the street in her gymnast costume, he saw that tall, thin man, and then the next he heard Shauna scream and he saw that red car speeding away, and that was it. Shauna was gone. And it all happened so fast, within seconds, which led the new detectives to start thinking, hang on a minute, what if more than one person was involved here? It was always thought that just one man, that tall, thin man, was responsible for Shauna's abduction and murder. But what if there were actually 2 or 3 even? What if there were multiple people involved? I mean, that would explain how it all happened so fast. If that tall, thin man was the one who grabbed Shauna and shoved her into the car, maybe there was another individual in the driver's seat waiting to speed away. So with this new theory in mind, the cold case team started looking into police records of local crimes that had been committed by more than one person. And that was when the O'Brien brothers came onto their radar. Jim and Tim O'Brien were local men. I think they lived in Oil City, and they were, I believe, both in their 20s when Shauna was killed. Tim was the older brother. He was, I believe, around 29, and Jim was about 5 years younger. He was 24. And they were both very well known to law enforcement. They both had lengthy criminal histories dating all the way back to when they were just teenagers. They were children when they started committing crimes. And in fact, in 1995, 3 years after Shauna was killed, the brothers were, I believe, both arrested for trying to kidnap a 22-year-old woman. This woman was just walking down the street when the brothers tried to force her into the trunk of their car. But she fought back, fought with everything she had, and thankfully their attempt was unsuccessful. This woman managed to get away and she called the police. And I mean, it's hard to ignore the similarities here, isn't it? The similarities between Shauna's abduction and the attempted abduction of the young woman. Shauna was grabbed and forced into a car, and the O'Brien brothers had tried to do the same thing to this woman. So could they have been responsible for Shauna's killing 3 years earlier too? Again, just like Ted Walker, they seemed like really promising suspects, but there was one big problem with this theory. It turns out that at the time Shauna's kidnapping occurred, on the evening of the 27th of October 1992, both men, both the O'Brien brothers, were actually in jail for other crimes that they had committed. So they couldn't have been the perpetrators. In fact, they were briefly looked at by the original detectives back in 1992, but yeah, it was found that they were locked up at the time and so couldn't have been responsible. Again, other men were looked into as the years continued to pass. They even had a confession from one individual. There was a guy that literally claimed to have been responsible for the Shauna Howe homicide, but DNA ultimately proved that he was lying. This was a false confession. Shauna's family, her mother Lucy, spent years after her daughter's death still living in Oil City, still desperately waiting for the news that police had finally identified her daughter's killer, but that news never came. And ultimately, staying in Oil City, staying in Pennsylvania, just became too painful for her. She just couldn't live there anymore. She felt like she was constantly looking over her shoulder, constantly living in fear, searching for the man responsible, wondering if the guy that she just passed on the street was the killer, or the guy that she just saw in the grocery store. I can imagine that it just felt like torture to her. And so 6 years after Shauna was killed, Lucy decided to leave. She moved out of Pennsylvania and relocated to North Carolina. Meanwhile, as the years continued to pass, Shauna's cold case was kind of handed from one detective to another. 2 of the key detectives who eventually became involved in the case were Detective O'Toole and Detective Graham, and it was when they started going through the case files that they made a shocking discovery. They read up on Jim and Tim O'Brien in the case file and found that they had been looked into as potential suspects years before, but had been ultimately ruled out as they'd both been in prison at the time of Shauna's kidnapping. Well, I believe it was in 2002 or the early 2000s, a decade after the crime took place, when the detectives decided to actually check this, actually double check that the O'Briens definitely had been locked up that night, and guess what they found? It was incorrect. Somehow, and I'm not sure how, but somehow the original investigators had gotten it wrong. They'd mistakenly come to the conclusion that they were both in jail at the time, but they weren't. The records showed that they weren't. Police had made a massive error. The O'Briens had been arrested shortly before Shauna was murdered for other crimes that they'd committed, but records showed that on the night of her kidnapping, both the O'Briens were out on bond, and therefore they would have had the opportunity to carry out this crime. The authorities had spent years and years looking for the killers when the O'Briens, again these very viable suspects, were right in front of them the entire time. And now Detective O'Toole and Detective Graham were convinced that they were involved. Now by this point, by 2002, the O'Brien brothers were in jail once again. Jim O'Brien was in prison for the attempted kidnapping of one woman, and Tim O'Brien was in prison for sexually assaulting minors, which speaks volumes in itself, doesn't it? So police spoke to the O'Briens, they interviewed them. They both denied having anything to do with the 1992 abduction and murder of Shauna Howe. But of course, to prove it once and for all, the police needed to make the DNA comparison. So they asked both brothers for their samples. And whilst I think they were both very hesitant at first, they ultimately gave it over and the samples were sent to the lab for testing. And finally, an entire decade after the crime, police had that breakthrough. Forensic tests confirmed that these two brothers, these two evil brothers who had previously been incorrectly ruled out of the case, were in fact involved in what happened to Shauna all those years ago. The younger brother, Jim O'Brien's DNA, was found to be an exact match to the semen that was recovered from Shauna's body and the semen found on her bodysuit. And that wasn't all. You remember that single hair that was recovered from Shauna's clothing? Well, that was found to be a match to Jim's older brother, Tim O'Brien. So now police had this confirmation of their involvement, but they still weren't completely satisfied, to be honest, because there was one particular aspect of the crime that still didn't quite add up, still didn't make sense. There was a piece missing to this jigsaw puzzle. It was the statement given by Dan Payden, his description of the tall, thin man that was seen right by the abduction site seconds before Shauna was taken. Police were certain that that man also had to have been involved in this case, but neither Jim nor Tim O'Brien fit the description of this individual. They were both quite short, stocky men, to be honest, so who was this tall, thin man? Well, in an effort to find out, police began delving further into the O'Briens' lives back in 1992, finding out who were their friends, who did they associate with, did anyone that they know match the description of this tall, thin man with the baseball cap? And guess what they discovered when they did this? They learned that back in 1992, Jim and Tim O'Brien would occasionally stay with Ted Walker in Oil City. Ted Walker, that creepy pizza guy that was also previously looked at as a suspect in the case back in the original investigation. Apparently in the early 90s, Ted Walker's house was what's known as like a flop house or a DOS house. He would open his home to people who could only afford to pay him a little bit of money for rent, and he would provide them with very basic lodging facilities. And I think a lot of people who would stay at his house would be ex-cons like the O'Briens O'Brien brothers. Whilst Ted Walker was previously eliminated as a suspect via DNA, police now believed that he may have in fact had a part to play in Shauna's kidnapping. Yes, his DNA didn't match anything found on Shauna's body or her clothing, but that doesn't necessarily mean that he wasn't involved somehow. He had this connection to Jim and Tim O'Brien. He had a small red car back in October of 1992, and again, he exactly matched the description of the tall, thin man that was seen by Dan Payden on the night of the kidnapping. Ted Walker had been interviewed, I believe, a couple of times over the years about Shauna's case, and he'd always denied having any part in it, but it was following the DNA matches to the O'Brien brothers that police decided to actually just go ahead and arrest Ted Walker on suspicion of being an accessory to murder. I think to just see if this would have any effect on him, to see if he would crack, essentially. And he did. The police's hunch was correct. Ted Walker admitted that he did have involvement in what happened to Shauna Howe, and it was kind of clear to the detectives that this was something that he had wanted to come clean about for a while. He wanted to confess and get this off of his chest, but I guess he was too scared to. But now, more than a decade on, he was finally talking police through his account of that fateful night. Ted Walker claimed that on the evening in question, the evening of the 27th of October 1992, Jim and Tim O'Brien, having recently both been released from jail on bond, approached Ted Walker. They'd been staying with him in his flop house, and they told him that they wanted to play a Halloween prank on the Oil City Police Department. As you can imagine, with lengthy criminal records such as theirs, the O'Briens hated the police, hated law enforcement, and they wanted to make a mockery of them, basically. They wanted to carry out this Halloween prank to show that the police were crap at their jobs, essentially, and just make them out to be a laughingstock, and they wanted Ted Walker to help them carry out this prank. The prank was that they were going to kidnap a child off of the streets, hold them hostage for a while, maybe an hour or two, and send the local police into a frenzied panic to start searching for the child, before eventually they just let the child go and the brothers could have a good laugh at the police, because apparently the idea of this was funny to them. And Ted Walker agreed to help them carry out this prank, and he claimed that for all he knew, that was all the brothers planned to do. Just hold a child hostage for a few hours and then just let them go completely unharmed. But of course, that is not what happened. The three men went out cruising the streets, and Ted admitted that that tall, thin man with the baseball cap was him. He was the guy that Dan Payden saw that night. Whilst the O'Brien brothers were waiting nearby in the red car, Ted was tasked with grabbing a child. Ted claimed that when he saw Shauna, he struck up a conversation with her about Girl Scout cookies. He asked her if she was selling Girl Scout cookies. He said to try and make her feel more ease when she was speaking to him, and then all of a sudden he just grabbed her. He picked her up. Shauna obviously let out a scream, which Dan Payden heard. Ted quickly passed Shauna over to Tim O'Brien, who forced her into the red car, and then the car sped away with Shauna inside. When they arrived at Ted's house, Ted claimed that the O'Brien brothers carried a terrified Shauna into the house and up the stairs to a room up there, whilst Ted stayed downstairs. But he recalled being able to hear Shauna crying and shouting. She was shouting things like, "Leave me alone and get off me." It's believed that that was probably the men sexually assaulting the 11-year-old. Now, Ted claimed that that was it as far as his involvement in the crime. He helped the brothers abduct Shauna, but he told the police that he had no part in anything that happened to her after that. Whether that is actually true or not, though, who knows, honestly. As we know, Shauna was kept alive for a couple of days after her kidnapping. It is believed that one night the brothers took her to Coulter's Hole and they probably assaulted her there, hence why her bodysuit was found discarded in the bushes. And it's also believed that during her captivity, or for a portion of her captivity, she was probably kept in the trunk of the red car, which would explain the carpet burn injuries that she had on her knees. They had probably come from the carpet in the trunk. And then the night after the bodysuit was found, the brothers took Shauna back to Coulter's Hole again. They took her up on the railroad trestle bridge and they callously just chucked her off while she was still alive, and she fell to her death. I mean, again, the pure evil nature of these two men to be able to do something like that to a child, to an innocent 11-year-old girl. It defies belief, doesn't it? Ted Walker claimed that following Shauna's murder, the O'Briens threatened him to stay silent about the crime, because if he didn't, they said that they would do the same to Ted's child. Apparently Ted had a son and they threatened to kill him too. And so Ted said that out of fear, he kept this secret for years and years, but he claimed that he felt awful about it, awful about the part that he had to play in this horrendous and vile crime. All three men were arrested in connection with the murder of Shauna Howe, and in the fall of 2006, their court proceedings began. As we know, Ted was initially arrested as being an accessory to murder, but when it came to his court proceedings, he ended up pleading guilty to kidnapping and third-degree murder as part of a plea deal that he would testify against the O'Brien brothers during their trial, and he was ultimately sentenced to spend somewhere between 20 to 40 years in prison. As for the O'Briens, they both pleaded not guilty to their charges. They were charged with second and third-degree murder. Not sure why they weren't charged with first-degree murder, but anyway. They were charged with second and third-degree murder, as well as involuntary deviant sexual intercourse, kidnapping, and criminal conspiracy. And of course, they were both convicted, both found guilty at the end of their trial, and they were each handed a life sentence without the possibility of parole, so they would never be released from prison. Now, as far as I'm aware, the O'Brien brothers are still alive and still in prison to this day. However, the same cannot be said for Ted Walker. He actually passed away while still behind bars in 2022 at the age of 63. Sources state that he died of natural causes, and apparently he would have become eligible for parole in 2024 had he still been alive. So I guess thank God that he passed away 2 years earlier, and thank God the O'Brien brothers are still locked up for life. Finally, after about 14 years, Shauna had received justice for her brutal and horrific death, and her family had some form of closure and hopefully peace of mind in knowing that the vile men who did this to their daughter could at least now never do it again to another child. Now, as I mentioned earlier, following Shauna's murder, as it took place just a couple of days before Halloween, Halloween was effectively banned in Oil City, Pennsylvania. They banned kids from trick-or-treating as it was thought to be too dangerous, or at least it was banned at nighttime, I believe. Kids were not allowed to go out trick-or-treating after dark, and this ban remained in place for 15 whole years until October of 2008, when I believe a 10-year-old girl who lived in Oil City started a petition. She gathered a load of signatures, and thus the Oil City Council lifted the ban, allowing children in the community to trick-or-treat at night once again. And that brings us to the end of this case. That concludes the horrific case of Shauna Howe. A very, very, very sickening crime, and yeah, I'm glad that those responsible were finally caught and are locked up in prison forever where they belong. As always, please do let me know your thoughts and opinions on this case down below in the comments. I would love to hear what you guys think. And also, of course, feel free to let me me know of any other cases that you would like to see me cover on this channel. Again, you can pop them down in the comments below. A quick thank you once again to Sunshine Island for partnering with me on today's video, and a reminder that you can download the game for free by clicking the link in the description box or by scanning the QR code that is on the screen right now to claim your 250 gems and 100,000 coins as the perfect head start. Thank you all so much for watching. Please do give this video a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you again next week for another mystery with Mollie. Bye.